Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks very much for the invite to be able to share a short presentation with you. I'm sorry I can't be with you um, in person today. I do feel this is a really important initiative, and I think it's something that needs to be seen as just a start to a process of having more interaction between the scientists and the true communicators who I'm hoping are sitting here and then in the session where they can be able to workshopping to see how best we can do that. The brief that I was given was how do scientists and researchers share their finding, but I'm going to change that slightly to where should scientists and researchers be sharing their findings. First of all, what is scientific research? Um, so it is a process, and that process or the recipe that it follows is having an idea or asking a question. And that would lead to constructing a hypothesis. Now, the question is not necessarily one that just gets asked by the researcher, us sitting here and deciding that we have a question in science that we need to answer. It can be, and it should also be, questions that society wants to pose. Questions that, in my case, park managers, hunting operators wish to be answered about ecology and about sustainability in the environment. So from those questions, there needs to be already an interaction between society and the scientists. From that, the scientists would go out and construct a hypothesis, which is more or less a educated guess after doing some research on what a certain hypothesis could be. We would then design an experiment, and that experiment would then be one to test our hypothesis. If it's a statement, to either prove it, or if it is a research question, then to answer it with something of a yes or no. And it's interesting that at this stage, so that green square where we're looking at testing with an experiment, this is often what we share, or this is often what the interest of the media are in terms of what we're doing. If I think of the experiments that we conduct with the immobilization of things like elephants and putting collars on animals and following them around, that's not really the research as such. That's the experiment that we are conducting. And I think that's something just to keep in the back of our minds when we go forward. Are we looking at sharing what's sexy and what's nice about it, that green tab in my illustration? Or is it really the results and the findings and sharing the message that we need to share in this sense? So if you know a little bit about my research, part of my research is looking at snakebite occurrence and that sort of thing, and reptiles, although I'm doing less of that this time. And there's just a little something to chuckle about that I was sent in response to some of the research that we're busy conducting. So, why should we conduct scientific research? I think in the altruistic sense, it's to further the bounds of knowledge. So it's to find out things that we didn't know before. And we need to assist society in finding solutions to problems. Hence those research questions that we create hypotheses from and conduct experiments. We also look at trends. So looking at things over a long period of time, collecting information. For example, climate change. Climate change came from scientific research of looking at climate over a long period of time. We can also use scientific research to make predictions of what might happen in the future. So that's just in short. If you talk about some people, or if you observe people, research is done to get a degree. Many of my grad students, there may be some sitting in the room with you. That's the reasons why we conduct scientific research. or to become famous, right? Scientists, many of them have egos, so we're quite notorious for that. And sometimes it's about doing the research and not the results or the impacts of the research that really matters in the scientific community. And I've observed in scientific conferences how this can totally consume a research conference. Back to the scientific method. So this is what I'm taught when I'm a scientist, and this is what I also teach in terms of what the scientific method is. So interestingly enough, there's a little orphan right at the bottom of the page called communicate the results. So we have these wonderful findings and then we communicate the results. So the communicators in the room, this is where you need to prick up your ears and help us. Actually, where we need to prick up our ears and you need to help us. What is it that we need to communicate? So if I go back to my textbook, and in fact, if I go to the syllabus of basic research methodology in many of the courses around MUST, I can promise you, you're going to be finding this. So we report our findings to other scientists. We publish our research in peer-reviewed scientific journals, hoping people will read them. We do books or book chapters that other scientists read, and we go to conferences that other scientists attend. Now, this is all a little bit tongue-in-cheek the way I'm saying it, but this is important. So publication of our research in scientific journals is important because that validates our research. Peers would review our research, make sure it's valid, make sure it's robust, and from that, they would then be able to, or we would be able to validate our research. But this is not communicating our findings. So if you want to look at a classic research conference or a symposium, this is what you're probably sitting with. Last week, we had an institutional research week, and I'm sure there were far more thoughts than this actually happening in the room at that time. Or if you observe these days in conferences, most people are punching on their computers while others are actually presenting their results. And is this really effective is what we must talk about. So what we do as researchers and scientists is we actually write books that no one really reads. And what we do is we actually beg or harass people to read our articles. And why do we do that? Well, we do that because our worth as scientists is measured by how many other scientists are using our research in their work. And in true scientific style, there is a formula and a measurement by which we are measured, which is called impact factor. So that's how often other researchers or scientists would cite our research in their publications. So if I'm an external reviewer and I get a research paper to external review, I might say, this one hasn't really cited many of my articles. Let me tell them there's some fundamental research that they need to add. Get my citations in there, up my impact factor, and I become a better researcher. Maybe a little bit facetious to say it that way, so take it a little tongue-in-cheek, but that is where we are sitting. So we are not really measured by the true impact of our research. Sorry to be in the way of my own slide there. But there have been a couple of attempts in scientific literature, and this one actually comes from biomedical sciences, where an article was written on citation metrics if they actually predict the true impact of scientific papers. The other scientists didn't really think it was a very good article, because that's, what, 3 years ago, and only 7 people have cited that. So, what does that really mean? Lutz Bormann wrote a really nice article in the Advances in Information Science, which I think is also a really good publication for the non-scientists to look at. And that was looking at whether the societal impact of research is actually being assessed and in which ways it could be. And he defines societal or research impact as societal, cultural, environmental, and economic returns from the results or products of scientific research. So back to my brief that was given to me, and I think for the non-scientists in the room, for the journalists, for the communicators, how can you find our research? Now, I do think that that's a little bit of a skewed question, because this is a place for the scientists to share and the journalists to find and understand. So it's not just up to the journalists to go out there and find our research. But these are just some of the easy ways for a journalist who wants to get into finding research that they can use, looking at what's current in research. And one way to do that is what we call ResearchGate. So that's the Facebook for nerds. So ResearchGate is where researchers or scientists can sign up, create a profile, add their research, make it available, advertise it to other researchers. And you create a little bubble of peers or a group of friends or followers that whenever new research comes out, that you would be able to see that research, you would be able to read it, but you would also be able to contact the author of it for more information. Another really easy way to do that is to use Google Scholar. I'm sure many of you use it for research, but creating a profile in Google Scholar and putting in your research interests will help you get this pop-up. And if you look at the bottom of the screen, you would get refreshed every week what the current research or what relevant research the AI bot of Google Scholar would think that you would like to have a look at. So it also keeps you up to date. And this is a way that I've been alerted most by scientists, either congratulating me on my new research or alerting me to other research that's quite current and quite interesting, is through this popping up on people's Google Scholar profile. So that is something that's quite relevant. Even if you're a non-scientist, you can create a Google Scholar profile. So if you're a journalist, let's say, with the research interests that you'd like to follow, and off you go. You will get alerts and you'll get these recommended articles, and you can read them or you can have them interpreted. And I think that's what this workshop will be about before we close for lunch today. So what I want to ask you is, how should we communicate the findings of our research? As a scientist, we're not taught to do that. We're not taught to interpret it for general society, and we're not really good at it. Sometimes we think we are, but if I look at an infographic, for example, that I make about a research, which I try to do in a poster, and I compare it to an infographic made by a communication specialist, it's chalk and cheese. It really is. So I think we need to communicate our findings more, first of all, to the stakeholders in the communities where we conduct our research. There's a lot of social science research or even ecological research like mine that happens out in our rural communities, in our communal conservancies, in our parks, and they never hear from us afterwards. So our research findings, they have to go find them on Google Scholar or something. And I think that's primarily just good manners as a scientist to bring this back to where the research was conducted. And then to decision and policymakers. Now, we don't always know where they are or who exactly they are, but it's really important to get avenues of doing that. There's been mentions of policy briefs, for example. How do we do it to the public? What should our message be? So these are questions that I think are for the workshop session. And as I say, I wish I could be at that session, but surely this is the start of a process. So in closing, here's just a little interesting thing that happened. As many of you might know, me and some of my colleagues conduct research on a lovely but a very little known animal called the black-footed cat. And if I have a look at the way that findings about the black-footed cat research project have been conveyed. So this is us. So my two student names are there at the top, and my name's also in there. So that's our 2021 report for the black-footed cat working group. And as you will see, two people have actually cited our research there. Hopefully more have read it, but two people at least have cited it. But you can see in the scientific community how limited the research findings have been shared. Then, but there was a documentary that was done on our little black-footed cats, on one of the study animals called Gyro. This was done a few years ago, but what you can see there, this is the little YouTube screenshot from this PBS documentary, and as you will see, 17 million people have seen this video. So when we think about the findings of our research, I think that's quite an important thing to share and to look at. How do we share our results? What are the messages we share? How many messages do we share, and with whom? So just in closing, I'm going to show this little video. It's a 3-minute video. And I think it's a really, really good video to show us what are the possibilities if we get the right storytellers, which I hope are in this room here, together with the right research to form a little bit of magic.
This little female is known to researchers as Gyra. She's tiny, weighing a mere 2 pounds, 200 times less than a lion. She'd be almost impossible to find, but she's being tracked with a radio collar. And using surveillance cameras that rival a cat's night vision, we can at last reveal her nocturnal pursuits. She can walk 20 miles a night in search of food, the farthest recorded for any small cat. Guided by superb night vision and responding to the smallest of sounds, she finds almost anything that moves is a potential meal. She'll even eat locusts. But she prefers gerbils. Or if that doesn't work, birds. With a wiggle to tuck her legs in, she gets as low to the ground as possible. Primed like a spring, she can deliver maximum power to jump. She hits her target 60% of the time. It's what makes black-footed cats the most lethal hunters in the entire cat family.